we help you pick yourself back up. And this is what we're going to do tonight with me and my guest tonight, Kat Day Gomez. We're going to help you pick yourself back up. And we're going to talk about shadow work. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, let's bring on my good friend, intuitive life coach, Kat Day Gomez. Hello, hello.
Hi. Hello, everyone. Hi, Romy.
Hello. Thank you for joining me on the episode number 3, State of the Shift. I'm proud to have you back.
And thank you so much for having me. And yes, it's always a pleasure. We just, we click so well. And I love, being part of anything that you do. So.
Yes. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. So, I kind of gave everybody the heads up on what we're going to be talking about today. And we're going to be helping the collective get through this shift that we're having. It's there's no denying there's some sort of paradigm shift happening. People are waking up all over the place. Others are falling asleep even deeper into their slumber. So,
yeah.
So this is my attempt to get people to get some knowledge and some wisdom on how to help ourselves through these emotions and through this shift. And these emotions have to do with your own self. Like the shift that I'm going through, Kat, is a lot of my inner work, a lot of my issues keep coming back up because apparently I'm not working through the right modalities or it just didn't go through long enough, or it just keeps coming back up. I'm not sure. But I know there's tools out there and there's techniques and topics like what we're going to talk about tonight. It's shadow work. And I kind of want to get what your definition of shadow work is. But before we do that, let's give our audience a little bit of your background. Who is Kat Day Gomez and what is her mission?
So, I've been doing life coaching, and it started sort of more as readings in the beginning, both tarot and oracle cards and things like that. But really that was only, sort of a means to an end, because my passion is for psychology and just basic therapies that are meant to help people progress and help them heal through traumas and PTSD and all sorts of things that, a lot of people really go through and deal with that they don't realize when left undealt with sort of create these self-sabotaging behaviors and scenarios for themselves. And so I sort of tasked myself with that without knowing what sort of title to give myself or name to call it. I just started doing it in 2014. And then now in 2021, I've been more professionally doing it for several years. So it's just something that at this point comes very natural to me. It's part of my passion. I enjoy seeing my clients and the strides that they're making in their own lives, and also hearing so much about how they're able to then pass on a lot of the things that I've instructed with them and recommended to them, being able to pass that on to their loved ones and friends and family as well, to help them on their journeys. So it's just sort of like, my little one says, I'm Johnny Appleseed. So, just planting those seeds to help people. And I think that's where it all started. And that's what I do now. So.
Wow, that's amazing. You must have had a wonderful journey with lots of lessons and lots of wins.
Lots of learning moments too, I can tell you.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
You touched on self-sabotaging behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
Can you Can you give us a few examples of what you mean by self-sabotaging behaviors?
Yeah. In fact, I actually want to go back to something you said earlier, about that even yourself, you find that as you're working through the different things that, you work through and doing your own, process of ascension, essentially you're ascending mentally, and you're making strides, and you're taking the time to work out the things that are going on inside of you and trying to be better along the way, right? A lot of times when people find that they keep hitting a wall when they're trying to do the self-help or trying to progress themselves, those walls, we tend to hit them more often when we think that we've done kind of the shadow work, or we think that we've done the deeper work, but we really haven't delved deep enough, or we've kind of just skimmed the surface and thought, oh, that's dark enough for me, and let me just put that away in the little box for a little while. And so I think that's it, is that a lot of times people like yourself who have the best intentions for themselves and others, they really start focusing on, well, how can I be of help, and how can I just continue moving forward and upward. And as they shift their focus to that direction, which is healthy and wonderful, but as they do that and they haven't really gotten done and into the nitty gritty that they need to get into, those unheard and unlistened to darker parts of ourselves are going to end up rising up and rising up and rising up to a point where you find that you're kind of snapping at your loved ones, or you're kind of choosing not to go into work even though you're really not sick, because you just can't figure out what's going on, and just things like that. So when I say self-sabotaging behaviors, I sort of mean that, like instances where you should be doing things one way that's going to actually be of your greatest benefit, but then you're like, no, let me just take this shortcut, or this easier way, or this way that's more comfortable right now, and see if that works out for me. And so that's the kind of self-sabotaging things I mean. And I can actually go a little more in depth with that too in a minute, but I definitely want to do the description for you guys as well.
Yeah.
Before I start that direction.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, I totally feel that. I mean, I think we all have this moment, this fork in the road, if you will, when we're going out through our lives, right? When we go through these issues, and when we're faced with these challenges, or these obstacles, or the pattern, and we have this fork in the road where we just know, if we make this decision, we're going to continue the pattern that we're in, or we can make this decision and move up in our evolution, and move past it. So that moment right there, and we all should know that we have the power of free will, where we can make any decision we want. That's what we're here on earth for, is to exercise our free will. And so that moment when we can exercise our free will, that's theoretically, it seems like an easy moment. Like, oh, you can change your mind. You can go this or that way. Man, it's so hard in that moment. So challenging in that moment to go either way with that one issue, that or several issues. So what do you say about that moment? How can we get past that fork in the road?
Well, I think so. Just to fully understand what it is that we're discussing, for those who are not familiar with shadow work, starting there might actually help. And that's actually the basis of doing the shadow work, is to overcome obstacles. So like those forks in the road that you're talking about, those decisions that are harder to make, and just when you find yourself, kind of starting to get what you want, or you've been getting what you want, but somehow you just keep not accepting it, or trying to find fault with the situation, waiting for the other shoe to drop, those sorts of things. So those kinds of obstacles and forks that you're talking about, So that's really what shadow work is for. In part, the other part is for healing as well. So what is shadow work? So as described, the shadow self was actually coined by Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung. Most people are familiar with Jung. For those of you who aren't, just go ahead and look up Carl Jung. But all of his works describe shadow work in great detail. And it's those aspects of our personality that we choose to reject and repress. Those parts of ourselves that we don't like, usually for fear that society will reject us. And we push those parts down into our subconscious psyche. And it's that collection of repressed aspects of our identity that Jung referred to as the shadow self, right? So essentially, like all the parts of ourselves that we find undesirable or unlovable, the darker thoughts that make even us uncomfortable and think like, I don't know why I'm thinking that or feeling that, those sorts of things. So we end up pushing those things down, and aside. A lot of times people also tell themselves, well, I don't know why I thought that. I would never think that. And so they just reject the different thoughts and different feelings that don't feel familiar, that feel too foreign, because it doesn't coincide with the base personality that they've designed for themselves. Usually people who feel inherently that I'm a good person, they assume that when they have any thoughts that would contradict the idea of being a good person, that those thoughts either do not belong to them and were influenced on them, or that there's simply no good and I've got to toss that out. Well, our heads, our minds aren't like computers with a recycling bin, right? There's none of that. You don't throw it out and it go anywhere. It just goes down. It gets buried, right? So the shadow work is the task of bringing to light the darkest parts of our subconscious with the aim of making the unacceptable acceptable. So we do this by forgiving our shortcomings, embracing our flaws, and inviting a newfound balance within ourselves, which champions the light while honoring the dark, which seeks only to be heard, acknowledged, and understood, right? So instead of thinking of things as good or evil, right or wrong, bad, favorable, things like that. Instead of doing that, when you start to process things from a more neutral point of view, kind of in a way, you have to almost treat yourself like you would a child. If a child came to you and said, I had this dark thought about my teacher today, you wouldn't shame them and tell them, oh, you're forever just gonna be in your own imposed hell because you thought this bad thing, and it's not fire and brimstone, right? Instead, you'd kind of look at that child and say, okay, I understand the thought, I hear you, I understand where it came from, let's figure out why that thought was there. What's really going on, what really bothered you the most about when the teacher did that, and things like that. So you talk the child through it. You don't shame and punish. You talk the child through it. So in the same way, you kind of have to start to do that for yourself. And that's what shadow work really is, in the most simple, broken down way of explaining it.
Wow. Yeah, totally. I totally get it. It's a great interpretation of it. And shadow work is a topic that not a lot of people know about. So when we're bringing light to this, we want to know, why is it important? Why is it important to start that shadow work?
Yeah, and that's actually that's the most important thing. You're absolutely right, is the why. Why do we do it? Because I know that a lot of people out there are so much more comfortable with just, well, I can just, tell myself like, that thought doesn't matter. I just put it to the side, or I don't care if it gets buried. It's fine. As long as it's out of sight, it's out of mind, kind of thing. Right. Mm-hmm. The problem is that it's, again, like it only goes down, and what goes down must come up, right? It all floats eventually. So essentially, I've broken down my own formula to explain it easiest to people when it comes to the why, kind of getting to why it's so important. And the formula goes like this. So suppression equals stagnation, confusion, irritability, unfounded judgment, depression, and ultimately it contributes to self-sabotage. And we can avoid all of those things, literally can avoid them or process our way through them and get out to the other side of them by doing shadow work. So that's the why. It's for prevention, to prevent us from going down those paths that, get us to the points where we can't take certain things back. Some things that come out of our mouths, the words, or some of the actions, that really, once they're there, once they're out there, there's no putting the lid back on that Pandora's box, right? So shadow work, one of the aims is preventing those things that we can't take back. The other part of it is, of course, healing past mistakes that we've made and healing past traumas that were induced upon us from outside sources. So a lot of times this looks like our upbringing, just things that we went through systematically over and over again through childhood. And it doesn't even have to be as extreme as like physical abuse, or even mental abuse in the way that most people think of it. The way it can work is just, sometimes it's little seeds of just misinformation or information about ourselves that, come from our parents and people we trust and we love and we look up to, that kind of give us this feeling that we're not good enough, and we're not good enough, we're not good enough. And that just keeps playing and playing and building so that by the time we're adults, it's in there, it's planted. And so that becomes a core belief, right? So things as simple as that, or as complex as extreme circumstances, rape, molestation, abuse, having loved ones that were in charge of you that had alcoholism or drug problems, things like that, the harder things. Other things can be bullying from school that you went through, just all sorts of the things that make us feel horrible inside about ourselves and about the world around us, right? And all of those things that go undealt with. So getting to the root of all of those things, coming to terms with understanding them better in our now grown-up adult mind, and being able to process and forgive ourselves and others. I know that that's one thing that in the healing process, people, press on and press on and press on, and to a point that it almost feels cliche, but it's really not. It's just as integral. And it's actually a component of that shadow work. But with the shadow work, it centralizes more on the act of forgiving the self. So the why in regard to that is, once we're able to forgive ourselves for our shortcomings, forgive ourselves for our misconceptions, forgive ourselves for mistakes that we've made in the treatment of others or in the handling of situations when we didn't know better at the time, or even if we did, and we saw ourselves kind of making the wrong decisions, but we just couldn't talk ourselves out of it. All those things, being able to come to a place where we reconcile those things, that opens up so much for us mentally and physically, because when we feel better, we do better and we manifest better. So working through all of those issues begins to open up those obstacles. We start to see answers that we couldn't see before, things that we were blinded to because we were so caught up in this self-loathing, this negative self-talk, all those things. It's like noise, and that noise just builds up and builds up and builds up. So when you're finally able to reconcile it and finally able to get to the root of it and tell it, I see you, I hear you, I understand you, and I accept you. I don't have to agree with you anymore, but I can still accept you and I can still hold space for you. And every time ego pulls back up that little, see, you did it wrong again, you did it wrong again, you can say, okay, well, I hear you, ego. I didn't do it correctly, but I'm okay with that. And instead of ignoring it, you're now creating space with it. So the way I like to explain it to people is like, if you have a child throwing a tantrum, mm-hmm. and it's like, I'm so mad, I'm so mad, I'm so mad, this is what's bothering me. The more you ignore the child, the louder he gets, right? Not quieter, he gets louder. Or he'll start deciding like, oh, well, there's other little mischievous things I can do to be heard. Since you don't want to hear my voice, maybe you'll hear my actions. And so that's what's going on inside of all of us. And so the more that we ignore those things, the louder it gets. The louder we take our dismay and our dishevelment and it comes outward. Like when people say, oh, so-and-so, be careful with them because they're kind of a train wreck. Usually those types of people, when people say, unfortunate things like that, it's not kind at all. But when people are saying those things, it's usually at that point in time for that person, that's when they haven't dealt with their stuff so much that it's just spilling over for all the world to see. And you hear a whole bunch of like, oh, that person wears their heart on their sleeve. They're overly sensitive over whatever. And in those situations, they're no longer really seeing even normal conversations very clearly. And they tend to take things personally that actually are not directed at them in a personal way. And so that's the sort of confusion that in my breakdown formula that I was talking about. Confusion is one of those things that happen as a result of the suppression, right? And so those misunderstandings, you're going to find that yourself or those people who are constantly having misunderstandings, these are people who are not dealing with their inner shadow, right? Their shadow self. So there's a quote by Carl Jung, and he said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. That's so important to understand. Until you make all those things that you've hidden and all those things that you've buried down, that baggage, until you bring it up to the surface and make it conscious, it will direct your life. Wow. And wreck your life. Wow. And you'll call it fate. And you'll say, I don't know why I keep losing jobs. I don't know why these things keep happening to me. I don't know why I keep, falling into these bad relationships and falling back out of them. Or I have these good relationships and I mess it up every time because I'm looking for something wrong. And if something's not wrong, then I feel like they're lying to me. So then I start looking for them to be lying to me. And I push the people away who have come to love me, right? So as much as you are in that place of suffering and hurt and all those things and want so badly to be loved, you're pushing that love away every time it comes to you. And it's all because you're not dealing with that shadow self, right? So those are like, I guess kind of those little analogies that I gave are good examples of like the shadow self interfering in daily life versus working through it and preventing that from happening.
Right. Wow, amazing stuff. And you're shedding a lot of light on the fact that we have to work on ourselves. We have to acknowledge the patterns and the behaviors that are happening and the root cause of these behaviors, and we can't hide from them. And they're just like you said, once we hide from them, the issues are going to keep coming back up, and it's just going to be harder and harder every time. So
absolutely.
Yes.
And in fact, what you just said is perfect. You said the more we hide from them and we just hide and we keep hiding. some people think that they're being more stoic by, well, I'm not hiding, I'm just putting it to the side. I'm compartmentalizing. I'm compartmentalizing so that I can get through my day. I'm compartmentalizing so that I can, you know, push through on my up leveling and such, right? You're not understanding that as you're putting that to the side, down to the side, wherever it's going inside of you. As you climb that ladder, you're taking that baggage with you. And the closer you get to the top, the heavier it becomes, right? Because gravity. So at some point, it's all going to pull you back down, or you've got to pause in that climb and you've got to unload that pack.
Right.
And you've got to put it in front of you and you've got to look at it and you've got to start to work through it. And it's funny because it's that phrase that the road to hell is paved with good intentions, right? Mm-hmm. So meaning like the person who's being stoic and they're like, well, you know, especially career people are famous for this, you know, myself included, you know, where you're just like, okay, well, I've just got to get through all this stuff. I can't focus on me right now because I'm focusing on all this. And you even kind of trick yourself into thinking that the more successful I become by focusing on all this good stuff, at some point, all that bad stuff won't even matter anyway, right? It just won't even matter because I will have convinced myself via my success that I'm good, I'm straight, I don't need it, right? No, not at all, actually. And again, like it's real sneaky because it comes out in ways and at times that you don't anticipate. And the problem with that as well is that like people who are so stoic like that, the moment that they let their guard down even a little bit, say you're just, you know, doing a relaxing drink or something and you're sitting next to your spouse and they say something that triggers you because it's something that like your dad used to say. And it was like a nagging thing. And it just pulls up all these feelings of self-loathing and like inadequacy and all that other stuff. You're suddenly drinking your drink and looking at your wife or your husband like, you know, how dare you? And they don't even know what they've done. And then you're in some kind of ridiculous argument over something stupid like cereal or a remote or something. And so it becomes like an avalanche, like that snowball at the top of the hill that as it continues to roll down, it becomes that avalanche, right? And so it's seeded. Right. So that being stoic and thinking you're doing the right thing by putting it all aside, that's actually an aspect of what I call and what actually is now a thing that we talked about last time, the toxic positivity, right? So, and it's crazy because we spoke about this in, was it 2019?
Yeah.
We spoke about this in 2019 and there was not a definition for it yet. Now in 2021, there is a common definition for it and it is toxic positivity. And so on the basis of toxic positivity, common misconceptions and how it is literally the enemy of healing and mental health, right? When I say toxic positivity, what I'm referring to are like those, like I just mentioned, the idea that, okay, I'm just going to be stoic and I'm going to press through and I'm going to ignore for the sake of up leveling. I'm going to ignore because I feel as though if I focus on all the things that I want, then all the things that are harming me will just go away at some point once I get those things I want. Not realizing that all those harmful things you're not dealing with are actually what's keeping you from getting what you want, right? That's one direction with it. The other most obvious direction with it is the constant daily affirmations of, you know, I'm worthy, I'm this, I'm that. These are important things to understand. You are worthy, you are wonderful, you are beautiful, you are all these things. Those affirmations are wonderful. But those affirmations are not meant to replace and stand in the way of you doing shadow work. It's not there for you to go, oh, look at this pretty flower. This over here is worth so much and it's so beautiful. And now you can understand the beauty of life. And also look at this other direction, all this suffering in the world around you, all these other people suffering, and what you've got going on isn't nearly as bad as that. So via comparison, you can't be sad. All those things that are distracting you from looking inward, digging deep, and unpacking all of that, working through all of those things that are bringing you down, right? That's toxic positivity.
Wow. Yeah. I was just talking about toxic positivity to my partner, Glow, the other day. And I know we touched on it the last interview, but I learned a little bit more about it just last week. So it's,
Yeah.
you bring it up again. So it's definitely something that it kind of feels like it falls in the realm of like the new age movement where you're like, okay, nothing but love and light. Don't look at the dark. Love
Yeah.
and light. Don't look at the dark. Well, you got to look at the dark. You got to see what it is so you can go through it, and reduce your fear from it. So the toxic positivity, yeah, I mean, oh, don't worry, just think positive isn't really good enough. Like,
Yeah.
what are you doing to deal with the feelings that you're feeling?
Right. Consistently telling people to focus on the positive and to switch their focus from the things that are hurting them. That's actually the worst advice that can be given. The true friend to the situation is going to be the person who's going to sit next to you and hold your hand and say, I don't know what's going on inside you, but I'm right here.
Yes.
They're not going to tell you, oh, girl, you've got it good. Oh, bro, you're fine, bro. Just brush it off, rub some dirt on. They're not going to do that.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that our friends who do say those things, mean the worst for us or, wish us ill will or anything. It's not like that at all. They are under the same misconception that most of the world kind of is at this point, because it has been kind of pounded into everyone. And it kind of starts at school too, because even in classrooms and the teachers, and they'll tell you, hey, shift your focus, and stop being aggravated at this, just, and hey, you know what, in that moment that might work great, but the problem is we don't have someone kind of teaching us along the way that that's a temporary fix, that's band-aid over bullet hole.
Right.
And I use that term because it's just as important. It's something that if that's all you do to help yourself are these things that are sort of like sugar, right? Imagine having a diet of only sugar. What's going to happen to you eventually? It's going to develop diabetes. It's the point is that all that saccharin, that's not what it's all about. And the other part of that whole toxic positivity thing is that it doesn't acknowledge the purpose of pain, the purpose of frustration. All of those things have a purpose because they're teaching us, they're forging us, they're showing us what we don't want, they're showing us who we don't want to be, and they allow us sort of this darker mirror to go, okay, so if I don't want to be that person, if I don't want to be that aspect of myself, what do I need to pay attention to that's going on inside that's making me feel like I could turn that way?
Right.
Where do I need to place my love for myself right now? What part of myself needs to be told, you know what? I hear you. No, I don't want to think those things, but I do hear you. And I'm sorry that whatever outside influence or inside thought pattern created you, but I'm here to hold space for that. I'm here to process it, fully understand what's needed, give that need, and then move on.
Beautiful.
And that's all we can do.
Yeah. And as long as we do the best at that, then, that's all we can ask. So very good practical examples of how to use shadow work with shadow work in your daily lives. Do you have any sort of um, pointers for beginners, something just easy to manage in the moment? Do you have anything that you can give our listeners?
Well, and again, like in the moment, especially interfacing in public with people, social situations, things like that, those are the scenarios that it's okay to go, okay, let me switch to default and be as kind as I can in this situation, calm as I can in this situation. Let me put aside what's frustrating me. And if I can't, and I really like this trigger is going to like make me react, then let me go ahead and vocalize to the person across from me, hey, I have to stop you for a moment because the situation is really triggering me. And I'm afraid I'm going to react in a way that I don't want to react, and in a way that will confuse you and make you feel like I'm not the person that I am. And so I'm going to excuse myself and step away from this for a moment so that I can process it. And I'll get back to you as soon as I can on whatever the situation is. And so being able to vocalize and just articulate, hey, I'm having a moment. That is one way. Again, like just kind of putting on that face at the moment and just finding that energy at the moment is another way. No one knows what's going on under the surface. But when we're away from that situation, day's end, whatever it is, the moment that we get the time, and especially when it's fresh, to kind of sit down and go, wow, that was a hard one. And why did it make me feel that level of anger or that level of irritation or that level of insecurity, humiliation, whatever? Like, yes, maybe I should have been a little embarrassed, but I shouldn't have been humiliated to the point inwardly that I was feeling. So why was I?
Right.
Starting to kind of ask the why. That's always your starting point.
Questions. Yeah.
Usually once you've asked that why, you just kind of relax your thoughts and just neutrally, like a doctor would when a doctor examines a body, just sort of let your mind float over your thoughts and think back, okay, this a similar feeling to what I just felt today in that interaction. What's the last time I remember something like feeling that exact thing, the same thing or close to it? And then what was the time before that, and what was the time before that? And so we almost kind of go backward in our timeline until we get to that point where we first remember that occurring. Usually it's in childhood, but not always. Sometimes it's in that like middle, almost adulthood, place in our lives where we were sort of going from childhood to adulthood and things like that. So, but wherever that moment kind of occurred, and you can get back to kind of processing that and then working through what you thought then and why it felt so devastating then versus in your adult mind where you are now and going, oh, maybe that wasn't as like bad as my child mind made it to be, but it scared the hell out of me because I didn't know what it was.
Right.
And now I'm able to understand what it was. Or vice versa. Sometimes people think, well, it was bad, but maybe it wasn't that bad. And once they get back to that root moment, they're like, as an adult going, who would do that to a child? And so now they're figuring out that, oh my gosh, what was done to me was so unjust and not cool, but I didn't know well enough. So I didn't process it. So it just left that scar inside. Mm-hmm. And so now when someone says or does this thing, I freeze up or I push away or I whatever. And so you're just essentially self-therapizing in a way. Now that is not to say that, anyone can do all of this shadow work and doesn't need help from a therapist or, a mental health expert in any degree. A lot of people actually need more help than they think they do. So this is not me suggesting don't get, medical help. In fact, when you start processing all of these things, if it becomes too much or you're hitting blocks and hitting walls that you cannot get past and you don't understand why, the first thing that you should do is actually reach out to a professional, whether that be a person of holistic healing or medical healing, whichever way that you feel pulled. or even someone who's simply a neutral advisor within your family, an aunt, whoever it is. But the point is that once you get to that point where you feel as though you need help and you can't do this on your own, don't. Don't feel like you have to carry this on your own. Even though it's your own inner work and your own shadow work, sometimes we need that outside sounding board to sort of like repeat back to us the things that we've said and that's going on, and make it, when you say it like that, now it hits me in a different way that wasn't hitting me before when I was trying to work it out on my own. So, by all means.
Nice. Awesome. Thank you so much for this lesson in shadow work and how we could work through it, and it's important, and the importance of working through it. Some great knowledge. Everybody, Kat Day is a wealth of knowledge, and if you want to visit her, she got her Facebook page, lifecoach.kdaygomez. You can find her on Instagram. Her Instagram is kathleen.day.official, and you can check her out on her website, alchemistandbutterfly.weebly.com. And so if you need any information on that, shadow work, or any of her services, life coaching, she can help you through life coaching, getting through this shift that we're in. So thanks again.
Absolutely. And if I could suggest, for those who are curious about this subject or would like more enlightenment on it, some suggested reading would definitely be anything from Carl Jung. And that's a Jung for those who aren't familiar. But also there is a book called Be Here Now by Ram Dass. That's a little more artistic in a way. So it's for people who are good with meditations and are better with creative thinking and things like that. It really does help to get you into your head and out of your head as well. So there's a lot of shadow work that goes into that book. But if you just need like some base reading just to kind of brush up on, I have my essay on shadow work, and it's actually just titled Shadow Work. It's actually on my website under the essays tab. So you'll find that there. And that's just really comprehensive. And it basically goes over everything that we've discussed, just a lot more clinically. So, and it's a short article, so it's abbreviated for shorter attention spans like myself.
Thank you.
So yeah.
I think that was for me too. All right. So very good. Awesome. Thank you so much. We'll definitely take a look at that, Carl Jung, and look at your essay on your website. I know we're a little short on time. We're trying to cut this before 9:00. We promised a card read. The good news is we have one person online right now that may or may not want a card read. So if you have time, maybe we can just do one card read before we get off the broadcast here. And if not, if nobody chimes in, then let's pull a card for the collective.
I cheated. I'm like, I don't know if this is actually a thing, but I cheated and I pulled one in light meditation right before we got on.
All right. Well, let's do it.
Do you want to see it?
Absolutely.
Do you want to see what I pulled? And I haven't read it yet. I just pulled it, but I saw what it said, and it's fulfillment.
Fulfillment.
So fulfillment. Look at that, like the divine light opening at the end of that tunnel, right?
That doorway, yeah.
So the definition that's given is a sense of fulfillment often comes from the realization of a dream or the meeting of a goal you had set for yourself. Reflect on what it is you need right now in order to experience fulfillment. Create a vision in your mind of what you would most like to achieve today, this week, this year, and then take action, no matter how small a step it might be, in the direction of your dreams. That's funny that it was the fulfillment card too, because honestly, one of the deepest keys to fulfillment is getting past our own selves, getting out of our own way. And we don't do that without the shadow work. So it actually coincides completely with everything we've talked about today.
Amazing. Amazing.